This is an RMK production brought to you by 10 United Podcast Network. I am Marjorie Phoenix, and along with my co-hosts, Kevin McLemore and Ray Porch, we want to welcome you to another Story Time and Wine. Story Time and Wine started out with the need to address some of the societal problems that we're facing in our community and in this country. We facilitate these discussions using the framework of teaching, learning, and modeling. This is a space for everyone. There are no experts here, just people that are open and willing and ready to share what they know and learn from one another. Our hope is that you will leave this room inspired, motivated, and with a little more information or knowledge than with what you came. What I want you to do tonight is just imagine yourself at a virtual cocktail party with very interesting people having an interesting conversation about issues that are important to you. It's a room filled with thought-provoking, curious social disruptors that are ready to be the change they want to see in the world. Now, we've incorporated a philanthropic arm to this event by raising funds for organizations that are addressing these issues that we discuss. So, of course, with this being story time and wine, we feature wines from One Hope out of Napa Valley, which is a social enterprise winery. 10% of the wines raised, 10% of the wines that are purchased tonight, the monies raised from that will go to a charity of our choice. And this month, it is the Women's League of Voters in West Volusia County. Now, that is local to me. And the reason why I chose that organization is because I am working with them on a production, Ladies Taking Liberty, which is celebrating the 100th year of the women's suffrage, where I am playing Sojourner Truth in this production. And so it's a very important cause, and it's an important issue. So I will put the link in the chat for those of you that would like to purchase some of the wine. Like tonight, I am drinking the Merlot. So if you're a Merlot lover, you'll like this. But you can look on the link and you'll see there are various types of different wines that you can choose from. And this will help support the organization that is committed to expanding voter access and fighting voter suppression, which is timely. Again, because of the topic we're discussing here tonight. With these two laws in Texas, one affecting voter rights and one affecting women's rights. So just a quick synopsis of both of these issues, right? The first one is the heartbeat bill, as they call it, that reads that you cannot terminate any pregnancies after a 6-week period, right? In which most women won't even know that they're pregnant at 6 weeks. And it also allows for any persons to sue someone who performs or induces an abortion or aids and abets one. It deputizes citizens by awarding them, I think it's like $10,000 for anyone assisting in this way. So this is something that can become very messy, very fast. Then they have the voting restrictions that they put in place. They have basically stopped the use of overnight drive-through voting polls. Mail-in ballots can only be sent to you if you personally request it. And all of these were used highly by voters of color in the past presidential elections. They've also made it easier for poll watchers to move about in the voting pools, just move about freely. Before they were restricted to certain areas, but now they can just walk around and look over your shoulder. and this can cause voter intimidation. So for me, that's all of this right here is like the real steal. So as I started to really like look at these two laws and break them down, I was thinking we would start the conversation looking at them individually, and we still can, right? But I also started to wonder about there being something bigger here that we may need to focus on. You know, it's not a coincidence that these two laws are happening, so that they happen simultaneously, which is part of a bigger picture and a longer game that they're playing here. You have voting rights, then you have abortion rights, then now they're also getting into education with this attack on CRT, critical race theory, and that goes into academic freedoms. So all of these things, right? And it seems like some of the other states, Florida, which I live in, is following suit. It's the same. We start with voting, then we move to this, and then we move to the next one. So, this is not anything new, right? Because this is what this country has done. It's voting rights has always been a huge thing that they've tried to use to suppress voices. Women's rights, right, for the longest. And this thing with abortion has always been at the forefront of everything that they have done. And education, with the desegregation of schools, and even before that, not allowing slaves to read, right? And then when they did want to read, they mandated what they read, which was the Bible, okay, because they could control them with that. But it was always like those three things right there. And so in knowing all of this, as I'm thinking about all of this, I'm like, where do you start? Right? Because there's a lot to unpack here. So I had some targeted questions, and I think we can still get to them, but I wanted to see if Ray or Kevin had any additional thoughts or opening remarks before we got into to asking some questions here.
No, I don't. I'm interested to hear what people think, and yeah, I've got a lot of thoughts, but I'm interested to hear what other people have to say.
Okay, all right.
I'm gonna echo Raymond, because the subject at hand, both hands, be it with the bill, the heartbeat bill, as well as the suppression of rights. I think we should start with the heartbeat bill from there. But as a man, I'm going to sit back, because to give a conversation to who this affects first and how it affects us second.
Well, so that question that I had initially when I asked about this, being something bigger, should we talk about the bigger picture here of what is really going on, or should we talk about the individual, the individual bills? Anybody have any thoughts on that?
I think so. Texas has always been historically its own meat, so to speak, its own dish. Texas has some of the most strictest laws on certain subjects when it comes to what's considered real deviant kind of criminal behavior. Everybody knows that. Don't get caught in Texas doing certain things, because that's your life right there. So this doesn't really come to a surprise that these issues are coming up. You know, I think when you're talking about a bigger picture, it's not just these two laws that need to be looked at or bills that were passed. Texas, in this last session, passed, oh my gosh, like hundreds, I think like over like 300 bills or something. I don't know how much it was. It was a big number, but a lot of them addressed a lot of minority groups, right? They pretty much banned, they talked about banning transgenders on sports teams, on school sports teams. So who does that affect? That affect, and we know Texas has been in the news for years regarding different laws about the LGBTQ community, right? So, you know, we're looking at that. There's so many laws that they had bans affecting women, but yet they protected something as solid as the Star-Spangled Banner. They passed a bill that said, what was it? All pro sports teams, all Texas pro sports teams have to play the Star-Spangled Banner at their games. That is a belief system right there that says a lot, right? So to me, if you're looking at a bigger picture, you're looking at really what Texas, what are they trying to create? What are they trying to create within the citizens of their state? What are they trying to manipulate? You know, they were also in the news for restrictions on social studies. What's being taught in the school system? What story we're going to tell, and how, you know, they wanted to take charge of that narrative, right? What's going to be told to the kids? So people really should be asking, what are they trying to do? What are they trying to do as far as creating, what type of society, so to speak, are they trying to create in Texas, right? And if the country was it's a group collective, and you have our country divided by red and blue. If anybody has hopes to, long-term to shape and mold the citizens of the country, one of the biggest red bullies is Texas. So you're going to have them go first. You go right ahead, lead the pack, because other people will follow. Like, who's going to mess with Texas? Y'all going to do your thing. Any other little red state after that, okay, well, we can follow. Texas did it.
Florida, and it's Florida.
Florida
is
one.
right behind them.
Right behind them.
Yes.
So what they're doing, and I think, I always like to say politics is like a, it's a measure and pissing game half the time. And Texas, as everybody knows, wins that measurement sometimes. They got the bigger guns, the bigger balls, the bigger, it's everything's big in Texas. I think they have that motto for a reason. Okay. So, and the sad thing is, like, I was born in El Paso, Texas, but that's all I can connect to Texas. I'm not in any way a Texan. Don't call me a Texan. I'll claim Hawaii. I'll claim my mama's state before I'll claim Texas. So, but they are, to me, leading a pack that, as a country, we really need to look as a whole. What is the government trying to do with our people? What are they trying to do? And if they look deep enough, I'm pretty sure people will be able to draw to some conclusions.
Yep. That's it. That's it, right? That's what I was talking about. I feel that, I believe that, because there are some other states that are trailing behind. I know Florida, then there's Mississippi, Alabama, there's a couple of other states, right? They're going to follow suit. And so that's why I said there's a bigger picture here. And of course, you've got to take it, you've got to fight this fight. You've got to look at the smaller parts of it as well. But I think in keeping the bigger picture in mind about what's happening here, right? Because you're asking the question, like, we got to ask ourselves, what are they really trying to do? Right? And is this really just about Texas? No. This is about the country.
Mm-hmm.
So you use Texas because they're going first. You use that as the case study and the example of what I should be doing in Florida, what y'all should be doing in your other states, right? Of what we can do to fight back. And that's the thing. I think that's the biggest thing, because these things happen and then we react. And while they're happening, we sort of could see or sense it happening, but for some reason, it's almost like when you see that car coming towards you, and it's like, you're standing there like, should I jump over here and move, or should I wait and see if this car is going to come and hit me? It's like, it's the timing. It's like you're watching and waiting, and then it just happens. And I feel like we stand and we wait a lot. And I don't know if it's because we don't know what to do. But, so I guess that's my next question is, what is it that we should be doing? Or what is it that folks in Texas should be doing? When it
But
comes.
Marjorie, you think about the reason Texas can get away with a lot of things is there's a lot of people in Texas that have those same feelings. They're okay with it. And granted, like with everything, I think sometimes people will be like, whoa, you went a little too far with that. Hold on. like slow down. You went a little too far. But, and it's kind of, they kind of go extreme, but there's a belief. And that's why I said, like, there's a belief system that has developed in Texas, or that has really always been there, but there's a belief system, and people are, a good majority is saying it's okay. Now, with the abortion bill, with the heartbeat bill, if you really look at all the arguments across the board, yes, people didn't like the whole 6-week thing. Okay. Yeah, we didn't like that. But several other states, their weeks are kind of all over the place too. And we know that, like, okay, there's a parameter. Where the big pushback was, they're going after the Uber driver, they're going after the friend, they're going after all these other people. That's when they said, whoa, that's too far. Now you're going too far, right? Like, that's where I think majority of the pushback came in, because if you listen to like all the news outlets, they were saying you are now punishing innocent people that did not have any direct involvement in the act of. So why are you punishing them? Right? Like that's going a little too far. And even with the exception rules, because there's really no exception to that 6-week rule unless it's a medical situation. But that is where I think more of the uproar came, because it was the bystanders, like the Uber drivers. And everybody knows you have to have, or maybe not everybody knows, but you have to have a driver after the abortion. They're not going to let you drive home. True. So someone has to drive you. So if my friend asked me to go, then I'm in trouble. And of course, people are going to say something about that.
Yeah, and there's a scary factor too, to, giving any citizen this right to call up and or report, or because they think you might be in the middle of or aiding and abetting in some way. So there's still something that's very scary about that, especially putting money involved. That's why I said that could get messy real quick with
so they
doing
created
something.
fear.
Yeah, so
They
there's so
created a
many
real fear.
elements to that if it was, maybe, like you said, maybe if it was just the 6 weeks, that's something else within itself, because, most women don't know,
Right.
in that 6-week period. But now you've had all of these other layers on top of it, that now you've created this fear factor of, even if you thought about it after 6 weeks, this is what can happen. So,
and that fear, like any time, and the country's been doing this now for the past year and a half, of creating a fear for people to conform. I mean, that's part of the reason, people, a great fear like that in those broad numbers is created. They need people to conform.
Yeah.
So how else do you do that? But you spread those kind of things onto other people. So yeah, there's I think there's just much more to it.
Yeah. Most definitely. So if what you say is true, if the majority of the citizens of Texas want this, and we're assuming that because they let it happen.
Well, I mean, you think a bill had to pass, and who is in the House for bills to pass?
They voted them in. Yeah.
Those folks voted on these people. Now, don't get me wrong. We always know, like, there's people that's supposed to represent us that really may not represent us completely. Now, I'm not saying everybody's in agreement, but they are supposed to represent the constituents. And so you're saying that pretty much your constituents that voted you in, this should be okay.
This is what they want.
I'm saying that as like a picture, a surface picture of it. I'm not saying that for fact. Of course, you're going to have people that like, hey, I don't agree with that. But, on the surface, that's pretty much what's being said.
Anyone else with any thoughts about that?
So I think about these things in terms of like how people feel, and then what are the conditions that create change? So in this country, in Western culture in general, the conditions that create change are on two fronts. One, there's the political conditions that create change. And then what operationalizes or makes the change happen are more the technical pieces. So in this instance, we're talking about legislation and the judicial system. So 72% of the judges in Texas, of 450 some odd, are males, right? And so what does that mean in terms of the conditions? So like, yes, there's the voting, right? But there's also kind of, who is driving laws once they get passed. And so in Texas, it's one of the larger states. So I think that plays a part. It's a red state, that plays a part.
Yep.
But I think that the systems allow this to continue. I don't think it's just voting. I think, like, if you think about judges in Texas, they're not appointed, right? There's 6 states that have like a politically elected judicial process in terms of judges getting appointed and things like that. And if 72% of them are male already, so that means that the voices of women in that state on multiple tiered levels is less. So I think that there's systems that make it hard to undo some of that, because it's every 4 years. During the last president's tenure, he appointed more judges in a 1 year or in a 4-year term than the last 2 presidents got in 2 terms. So if we were to backwards map across this country, the numbers of judges that were appointed, you're going to find that by that last president, I don't even like to use that dude's name, you're going to find that if you pick a state, he had more appointments in that state than any other state, right? And then those other 5 states probably fall in on those high ends as well. So I just think, to Marjorie's point about like, what's the bigger question that we need to be asking? And so the abortion piece makes sense to me when you think about the voter suppression piece. If you look at the percentage, about 35% of the population in Texas that are comprised of, based on census data, comprised of single family households. This is through 2019. That number has been pretty consistent over the last 4 years. So what are we really, so what's this about? Like, what's the impact when folks can't get an abortion? Who's that impact? How does that affect the economy? These are the questions that we should be asking, because there is an end game. And in Western culture and America specifically, it's always going to be anchored to the dollar. Always, without fail, every single time. It's not just about values and beliefs and I don't like these people because they look this way. It's always going to be about money. So that's what we got to peel back and look at. And I think I said this to you before, Marjorie. We were having a conversation the other day, right, about how we look at scenarios and situations. And oftentimes it's very surfacey, because the most disruptive decisions elicit an emotional response from people. So what happens is we get all distracted. We're not paying attention to what's the game that's really being played. So I loved your question about what's the end game. It's the right question. You got to keep peeling. It's an onion. You got to keep peeling it back, right? So it'll be hard to argue that in American culture, the bottom line is always up about money and or power. Sometimes they're synonymous with each other. Sometimes one leads to the other, but they're always going to be in the room together. So how does this abortion law create power? For whom does it create power? We already know what the power is in the voting suppression, right? So that's like what we got to do in our community. We got to peel back like what the objectives are in these conversations and look harder. It's not just about, Kevin, you said this early on, like, this is going to have an impact for everybody in Texas, not just women. What I mean? Women have sons. So
right. You bring up a good point when it comes to, because we're talking about really the systemic issue, right? And that's affecting Texas's world, we'll say their world, but also, eventually will affect the rest of the country. And, there's that kind of game in politics that you absolutely also, you kind of touched on, is that distraction, distract them because, raise this issue over here, because then they're not paying attention to what we're sliding in there over here. And it's what they're actually sliding in that's probably going to do the most damage later on. And I think, also during the previous presidency, he was a good person that demonstrated that, right? And I think manipulated communication systems to do that, right? Everybody, and I had been saying this, I said, you got to get woke, because they're dangling carrots over here while you're not paying attention that you're getting screwed behind. like they're feeding you in the front, but they're screwing you in the back, like guaranteed. So, that's the one thing we can trust of certain systems and structures of this country, that they're going to screw you in the back end, if you're not paying attention to what they're doing in the front.
Yeah, most definitely. Go ahead, Brandon.
And when you go, like, just for process purposes, when you create legislation, what happens is it's law, right? So law happens, and then when do we test the law, right? We test the law when a case is brought to court. So someone says you broke the law, this particular legislation, you choose to fight, you end up at the highest court, which is the Supreme Court. But you got to go through those other judicial processes first, right? So if the gatekeepers are the judges, right? Like, what's the likelihood if you end up in that condition that you overturn? So think about what happened here in the last 2 weeks. They had the temporary barring of this law. It got overturned, right? So understand how this is playing out. And you sit and you say, well, if you don't pay attention, you're saying, well, how did that get overturned? Well, you got to know who the judges are, right? So when people were calling this last dude crazy, maybe he's a little off the reservation, but his peoples, the ones that climbed over the wall and all that foolishness, right? They weren't crazy. The ones that sat in the Capitol, like, having, cheese and crackers while they were defacing our country, right? They're not dumb people. We're not talking about people who are dumb. We are talking about people who don't care about the things that we are to be governed. And when the government doesn't work for them, they're like, well, the government don't mean nothing. So the only people the government has to mean something to are the people who fall under, who are to be governed, right? So we've seen that in real time. So if you think about it, legislation is also, when it gets to court, about interpretation, right? So easy example, right? You go to court and the judge overrules something that is law because of the interpretation in that instance. That's what court proceedings are for. But if the deck is stacked, what happens, right? So we gotta understand these things. The more important of the two is the voting suppression, and I'm saying that from strictly a structural understanding of, like, you got to understand how the game is played, right? I got a wife, 24 years. I got a grandson. I got a daughter. So it's not about not appreciating the right for a woman to choose. It's zero to do with that, but we get lost in that, right? The more important of the two is the voting suppression, right? That's the more important of the two, because if you can vote, then we just got to operationalize people to go to the polls, right? We saw the impact of that. But to your point earlier, Keisha, the distraction is like elicit some emotional response. What do you mean I can control my body? Now we get all lost in that. And in the meantime, the one that we should be paying attention to is the voting suppression, right? That's how this country gets down. Look at the history of America. Everything in the history of America, if you continue to go into Euro history, conquer with power and or physical domination. Power comes through legislation and law that was defined and decided by folks that look one way. There were no women really involved in that process. Even they women wasn't involved, right? White women weren't involved. All white men. Look at what still exists. Look at the judges in Texas, 72% male. And if you peel back that data, you're probably gonna have a real tiny minority number, right? So what's really changing? Like, we gotta pay attention to the right stuff so that we can come to the table and be strategic and deconstructing some of these things. The reason we have a hard time is because as communal people, we don't dig in that way naturally. And so some of us, we were like, okay, we can't, and I'm in that demographic, why try to play the game that the deck is stacked against you? So you got to create a new game, right? We have to make a commitment to that, right? Because we also still spend more money than anybody on the planet, right? And so we got to find ways to leverage, to deal with the political pieces, to deal with the legislative pieces. And that's the conversation. Those are the conversations that we got to kind of use these as case studies to inform how we get down. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
That's kind of how we got to think about this thing strategically.
And since you spoke of how we think and how we react, I mean, Ray and Marjorie, we've had this conversation about the power of words, you think about looking back at the history and look at the situation. 8 months ago, 9 months ago, the country almost became united. A group of people that were being oppressed or suppressed became united. If you look at the fact that the era of Martin Luther King, you look at the people that marched on the Capitol building, 250,000 people. When you look at the representation of that population, we were the small minority. We're less than 6 to 8% of the 250,000 that were there. There were whites, Hispanic, Asians, and so forth. So George Floyd's murder was an attempt to unite a group of people that didn't have a voice, and that voice got heard. So these group of individuals, and this is just my perception and interpretation of the conversation we're having and what we're seeing, they said, let's run a test run to see if we could disrupt and separate and put them in small groups so we can pick them off one by one. So when we go after women's rights, what was the pushback from that? We go after the LGBTQ community. What was the pushback? Now we go after, since we've got them divided, we're going to start recruiting some that look like us, that sound like us. They get the people that are on the fence or not sure or not educated and says, whoa, he was a great running back, so let's go ahead and support him. He's got to be right. They don't look at the fact that, they don't have a meal. They don't know where their next meal is coming from. The person speaking to them is being served his meal by someone. And they make up opinions based on not fact, but who's delivering the message itself. They're trying to make this country great again based on, you look at John Brown. What happened to him? Basically lost his life. It was lynched. He attacked Harper's Ferry. And what happened? His crime was treason. January 6th, a group of individuals attacked our White House. What are they being charged with? Hell if I know.
Can't even get him charged. The AG was like, he didn't want to charge him because he said it would radicalize them if they spent time in jail.
Yeah. And the sad part about it is that people of color, when they're putting us behind the bars, locking us up, throwing away the key, they refer to the videotape. For some reason, the videotape is either in black and white, internet connection is not quite there, or everything's out of focus. We saw it. I still think of the fact is, what if it had been all of us attacking a Capitol building? There would be a few of us on this, having this conversation right now. We would probably be creating memorial sites based on what happened. But you can kill a cop on the Capitol building and go, he was in my way. You can throw a brick through a window in the Capitol building and you would call it central air.
Wow. Kevin, it goes back to what Ray was talking about, money and power. And it really comes down to that. Who holds the key?
That's what the fear is.
Yeah.
When you look at the census, they said that 25 years from now, 80% of the births in this country will be of biracial children. Well, okay, they will go from a single digit representation of this country, and their biggest fear, and we've had this conversation, is they think that the way history has treated us, that we are going to treat them back that way. You look at the fact that when we went to COVID, the only people who made money were the rich people. Only people cried foul and hurting was the people that they had their foot on their throats. This is,
let me circle you back real quick before you go too far about what you said about the birth rates, because that was something that I was going to bring up and just throw it out there to see if it stuck. That the census that just came back showed a lower rate of births in white babies. And so the thought was, could this have anything to do with that? Because remember now, the white men were marching around about not being replaced or something like that, right? There's this fear of being the minority, being replaced. And again, we might think that might be too far off, but
it's the next couple of years. It's the next election. Why you have you ever seen a president that had been removed from office or replaced still on the campaign trail? And 44% of the people are still voting for him, and he's not even running for office yet.
I wish Bill had come back, but they wouldn't let Bill come back.
If Hillary come back, they'll really shit bricks.
Yeah. But this conversation is a conversation that needs to be had. This conversation needs to have a conversation that has a strategic plan to unify us and to go after what is really going to get their attention. Is one, eliminate the terms of these people making these decisions. The other, and allowing people, the way the politics have been set up, to actually have people that represent the people and not the people during the election. That's going to serve.
I see Rhonda has her hand up.
Go ahead.
Hey, Rhonda.
Hey, brothers and sisters. I don't want to say too much, but I am listening. I am here, believe me. And what I want to say is going to be typical Rhonda. Okay. Is basically, we got to find out what's going to appeal to us. And I feel like by listening to this conversation, sometimes we're not real with each other. We are lost right now in a sea of where we are as a people, and we have to learn how to identify with one another and how we could bring those people in. We got to be real with one another and show them what we really mean, what's inside of our hearts. I feel like, it can't be these disruptions anymore. Like Philip is saying, it can't be these incidents. We have to figure out what issues concerns them before something else happens. We have to be more proactive than reactive about this stuff.
Mm-hmm.
You feel me?
The proactive stuff, right, Rhonda?
Yeah, we got to take naps to stay woke, like y'all been talking about.
That's where I think Texas is trying to, especially with the voter suppression, they're trying to silence people.
Their voice. Yeah.
They're trying
Voices.
to silence populations that they know can end up taking over, that can end up having a voice. And how do they do that? Is through the voter suppression, and they lock it in as tight as possible. Every scenario, it's like a playbook. Like, we suppress all of them, and the only people that will be able to come vote are people in Range Rovers and Ford pickup trucks, and they'll bring their whole family. That's no problem. And, that's what we want to come vote, and so I think that, I know there was a huge argument that, Texas was looking at, there's been this theory of population control and creating, a race, a stronger race within Texas. There is that theory going around, and I mean, it definitely has some ground, if you ask me. They have a few playbooks, to go off of historically.
And abortion, honestly, has been anchored to money too. Like the reality is, folks who have money and resources, it don't even have to be public record, right? So what are we really talking about, right? Like, this, got this hand over here, see what I'm doing behind my back. It's the game. It's the same game that's been run for hundreds of years, right? And I think like this idea of there's a population of people who are getting smaller because at the end of the day, people love who they love. People get with who they get with. And this idea of a pure kind of one race, that's like a misnomer. Like any informed human walking on the planet understands that there's nothing that can be done to stop that from happening. Like, we are going to be less of one dominant kind of race populace as we move forward in the next couple of decades anyway.
They ain't even as pure as they think they are.
Well, it's just the power in the genes too. Like, if you drop some ink into, some black ink into any color, like that color changes.
True.
That's just what it is.
Yeah.
And so I don't know that like any kind of legislation can prevent people from getting with each other, and the folks who have resources gonna have or not have children.
Hey,
like,
but Ray, money has color too. Money's color.
Sure. No doubt.
That's the race they're going on right now.
Yeah. That's what I'm saying. It's the power in the dollar.
Yep.
Good old democracy and capitalism running hand in hand together in American culture.
How do you change the game? Redirect where the money goes.
And that's what I wanted to get to next. Like, we march, we go out there. There's some of us we know, we've been doing the marching thing for years, and I'm not going to knock it. And I've gone and I've been a part of marching because that's just what I got to do. Right. And, we want to, we vote, we're trying to vote and get the right person in office and all of that. But what are some other things, right? What are some other things? And just like you said, if it's money and power, then it's economics, and the power isn't where? Like, isn't it in the politics, or is there another form of agency and power that we need to have?
You want to see how powerful our money is? If every black person stopped buying off of Amazon for 30 days, there'll be a different conversation 35 days later.
Ooh.
30 days and watch what happens.
If black people stop buying from anywhere, just one friggin' day, I'm telling you.
No, something that won't work, for the simple fact is that, remember I told you earlier that I sat in a room with 2,500 people from the UK, and they said there was $80 billion left accounted for, and the room got silent. For some reason, they didn't realize that I was the only black person sitting in the room. And they said that we need to invest in black because they like shiny things and they're consumers. They're not business people, they're consumers. Mm. Why do you think that alcohol or beer companies put posters or billboards by our high schools in their cities? Why do you think, the 40 ounce went from 16 8 ounce? Because they figured if we get it into our system faster, they'll go right back down to carry out and get it again. This has been a plan to keep us trained. It worked with the Indians.
Yeah, but I don't think, for me, like, I don't feel like that's us. I really don't. I mean,
no, but that's what we are, and we have accepted the handout that we've been given, and we're okay. And most of us are okay, except for the people that are here that are saying we need to change. It's not the disruptors, the people that are having conversations and meeting. Where the problem lies is the people that stand on the sideline and listen and don't do anything about it or never say anything.
So you guys should have another story time and wine on that topic right there, because that is a hot topic as far as the black community and that dollar. Because I will say, Kevin, I'll agree with you in respect to during this whole pandemic, I had said to many people, like the whole Black Lives Matter, ask yourselves why all of a sudden Black Lives Matter came up all of a sudden and a whole bunch of money was being thrown at it. I feel like this country, the fathers of this country have that same idea that Black people are consumers. Throw some money at them, they will follow. And I feel like that's what we kind of saw, where give them some money. There you go. Because that's what they give them some money. They'll be happy. And again, not paying attention to what's happening in the back. And I feel like so many people were blindsided. People were getting them PUA checks. They were getting them cards. They were getting all this. They were getting, oh yes, they finally say we matter. ask yourselves, why are they finally saying you matter? And they're throwing money at you at the same time. Did you not matter 10 years ago? Like, why all of a sudden, and I hate to say this, why all of a sudden are the white folks saying black people matter? Okay.
There's a lot of them still having a problem saying that, but I get what you're saying. Like,
okay,
they're
feeding you in the front, and they're doing something in the back.
Because there's $3 billion sitting out there unaccounted for, and they're trying to figure out how to put more deposits in their account and more withdrawals out of ours. And we don't even pay attention that it's happening.
As I said, y'all gotta have that.
Keisha talk about next level. Keisha going on some next level stuff. You gotta slow down. You going on some next level stuff, like for real.
We gonna pick it up next month.
That's why I say you gotta have a whole nother conversation about that. Make sure I get my invite, please.
But this whole the voting thing and the abortion thing is a microcosm of that conversation. Yes. It is. Right, it is like it's money, it's power. It's never going to be about the humanity piece. And I shouldn't say never, because I'm a hopeful person. It often isn't. Historically, it is not. Right. When they was throwing tea bags in the ocean, in the harbor and killing each other. Right. We ain't had nothing to do with that. Like, they had the peoples back in Mama England that they didn't want to take care of their own people. They're like, no taxation without representation. They had like slaves. They was getting paid free, right? And didn't want to take care of their own peoples. Like, so in the history, Euro history, all conquerings come through bloodshed and death. Like, I'm not making that up. Grab a book, go back 400-500 years, do Euro history, connect the dots. You'll see I'm accurate.
And that's one of the things
that's how they get down. That's how they get down.
If you look at the history, why do you think that when a young buck, as they would say, stood up against the master, they either tarred and feathered him in front of his family, his children, and whatever, because they wanted to send a message that if you stand up and oppose what we believe, this is what's going to happen to you. And what happened was they took the spirit out of the warrior and created an atmosphere of what's going to happen to me next. And the problem that we have right now is the warriors start to come to fruition, and they're trying to figure out a way not to band the tribe together, so the warrior can not only have a voice, have his presence.
And when you live in survival mode, so to that end, it's harder to be strategic when you live in survival mode. When the conditions are such that you're just holding on and layer in the generational trauma like our people have, right? And Indian people have, and Latino people have, right? Of course, a dollar is going to get your attention because you're craving more than survival. You can't think about like so for me in schools, big foundational piece of engagement is our students fed, the students that are the most leveraged or disproportionate kind of access and opportunity, or the outcomes represent like the lowest performing given the construct of education. When you talk to those students and their families, it's practical things that change engagement. Like, am I sitting in class and my stomach is growling? Now, I'm not going to sit still. I'm not going to be able to stay awake if it's early in the morning. Like, it's going to impact how I behave in the classroom. So now let's target the behavior, right? So you're not paying attention. You're not compliant, right? And so you're not getting the lesson of learning. And then let's factor in more control conditions. Because you're not compliant, you're being disrespectful. And so now your behavior is being attacked, even though the conditions that create the behavior are not being paid attention to. This is no different than that, right? When people are hungry or starving for to not be in survival mode, they chase the bag. We talk to our community, that's a disease in our community, chasing the bag. We got rappers, we got athletes on talking about politics. They ain't picked up, but they don't know nothing about legislation. but like we listen to them. No disrespect, I'm just keeping it real. I said this to my colleagues the other day. We want to do education and we want to do this. Like those things, just like shooting a basketball or skating, you have to have muscle memory and repetitions. I can tell you how many hours I spent on a basketball court because I played at very high levels, right? Kevin played football. Like, you got to put time in. So why we backwards map to people who put no time in, who go on the internet like they, some of that information is accurate, some of it is not. How do you define whether something's valid or not in terms of information? Like, my point is these things take time, but in our community, it's we don't respect, the people who show up to inform us. Paulo Freire used to say you have to be among the people in order to feed and teach the people, right? You have to be among the people, right? We got Jay-Z and God bless him, dope dealer turned multimillionaire, right? We listen, and I'm not saying we shouldn't listen to some things that make sense business-wise. That's not what I'm saying. That's not the point. The point is, how much time has that brother put in unpacking our history and our timeline?
But
not a lot.
They're counting on that.
You know what I'm saying?
They're counting on our community and not just our community, but the layman's community to listen to those kind of people. So we're in a whole different playbook than they are. And I feel like, their playbook is, we're paying attention to Texas, but we got to pay attention to the other states, because it's like they all get together in a room and say, okay, Texas, this is your job. You go do this.
Yes.
Tennessee,
yes.
you do this. Florida, you do this. We already know Florida probably going to drop the ball. You had one job. You did this, you dropped the ball. Yep. But, Florida, go do this. Alabama, you go do this. And all of those actions together play one big contribute to the
that's the big picture, the big thing.
Let me ask one question when you're talking about the big picture. February 13th, two things are happening. The largest sporting event is now being played, the Super Bowl. Mm-hmm. Then it's running right in line with the world looking at the Winter Olympics. Now you're taking the third factor and ask, is this happening on purpose or by accident? You pick one of the most successful rappers in the industry and you give them a platform. Are we being entertained or are we being trained? Think about that. Think about where they voted.
We might be being distracted.
That's what I'm saying.
Well, that's the entertaining part.
Yeah, because right
we
now,
love to be entertained, boy.
Because what do? All right, we deface our women, we disrespect our women, we talk about whatever, and guess what? If you can do it to a beat, I can pay for my little house on the island. Think about that.
Well, and look at the generation that's actually attracted to those acts.
Yep.
Right? What generation are they absolutely pulling away, to look to see that? Because, oh yeah, that's our type of music. I might actually tune in, right? The ones that are actually thinking and may actually be woke. Yeah, we need to pull their attention over there.
Right. They said it the other day. They know how to train us because we show them.
Okay.
Think about this.
Okay, so we know all of this, right? We can see all of this. We can come with with the analysis of what we see happening. And again, when it comes to, okay, where do we start? What can we do? Kevin, you said you start with the dollar, right? So that's another separate conversation we need to have.
Is the beginning and the end, because if there's no profit in it, there's no conversation in it. You look at what we talk about now. You look at the podcasts and the things that drive the most interest is how to get rich. Every single book you go to the Barnes and Noble, 7 Habits of Successful People, Think and Grow Rich, number one book. Everyone's chasing the dollar, and the people that control the dollar are the people that own the banking systems and so forth. There's not one to politicians that's not sitting in that seat that's not attached to a dollar.
Okay.
I would say this, right? I would say this, and then I'll listen. I agree that that's the structure. I disagree that that's the plan to solve it. And
Okay.
I'll tell you why. Part of the problem is that we live in a Western Eurocentric existence. And because of that, that narrative that Kevin just spoke to becomes the reality because we accept the definitions that go with it. We've talked about this before. So I'll use myself as an example. Am I going to go sell dope to pay my mortgage, take care of my family? No, I'm not. Like, that's not even a question for me, right? Now, I got cats that I grew up with that are still in jail, right? Because their position on that was different than mine. Now, I'm not standing and saying, hey, don't do what you got to do to take care of your family. So now what we're really talking about is a moral beliefs perspective. And what I would submit to you is that we've compromised our morals and our beliefs as peoples who come from a communal environment in existence. When there were wars in Africa amongst tribes, they didn't kill you off, you became a part of another tribe. You had roles, responsibilities, you expended on your family, you just became a different part of the tribe. So in this culture, like, look at where our young people are. Look at where your own families are. If your family's connected as they should be, y'all know, I got to drop the T on your families, but I would probably guess that we're a little stretched out because I don't want to live with this auntie or uncle because they live this way. And like, but you look at some Asian people in Boston, you come to Boston, go on Hancock Street in Quincy, they live 15, 20 deep to a house. 5 minutes later, everybody got a house, right? So I'm saying that it's both and. It is not as simplistic as control the money. It's not the reality. I know people who played pro basketball and they had no money, they had money, and then they broke again, right? So I don't think that's the solution in and of itself. I think understanding the systems around financial are essential, absolutely, like financial literacy, right? But I also think we have to think harder about what our own values are, right? Humility is not in vogue anymore. People don't want to be humble. Yeah, oh, look at me, look at me, look at me. This is what it is to buy into democracy and capitalism. It's still more distraction. It's still more of the same thing. The controlling the dollar won't stop the killing in our community. You got to stop pulling the trigger. That ain't got nothing to do with money always, right? We have to investigate our own morality. We have to look hard at what our own ownership of values and beliefs are around family, around wellness, around health. These are questions that need to be answered. We keep trying to solve things with technical solves. Economics is technical and yes, essential. It is not going to solve anything. We still have to have these conversations and really be present with one another about what we value and believe. Because if you change those definitions, if we own our own definitions around those things, we're retraining and reshaping our minds and thoughts. Those will translate into what we do with our bodies and how we interact and how we get down in the world, right? That's me speaking I statement. You know, I don't expect anybody to agree with that. I'm just saying that's what I believe. Right?
Amen. I agree with you. So it all boils down to education, stripping it down, peeling back the layers, the education and the truth of education.
So I see Morgan made a comment here about collaborative economics, which is used in almost every community except ours. Is something that we have to change, definitely. You know, what does collective power look like? What does it really mean to have agency so that we feel like we do have more control and more say? So, you know, this is obviously coming together, you know, having this one conversation. We're not going to solve the problem, but this is the beginning, right? And this is what RMK Productions and Network is all about. It's about creating the space and platform to have these kinds of conversations, because this is the kind of community we are building. All right. About us, for us, and everybody. Right. So with that, I'm going to close up, guys. If there's nothing else that anyone wants to say, I'm just going to say, you know, we still left a lot out there. You know, Texas is going to be Texas, just like Kaisha said. They're going to suppress your votes. They're going to suppress your rights. And they're going to also suppress the need for mask wearing. But they're going to promote guns and weapons and whatever else suits their purpose. Texas is going to be Texas, but we all have to figure out a way that we can work together if we don't want to be living in a Texas ourselves. So with that, I want to thank you guys for joining us tonight. I hope you learned something. I hope this got the wheels turning. I hope that you'll come back and join us. And listen, we have got some other events besides our podcast that we have here on the network. Of course, Kaisha's here from BFF. Black, Fabulous, and 40. So they drop every Friday night, her and her co-host, Crystal Grant. And then we have Talking with Kevin and Son, One Queen, Two Kings. And then, guys, in the next couple of weeks, we're going to be introducing, just in time for the holidays, Cooking, Wine, and Entertaining show. I'm going to be talking about the wine because that's my thing. And Ray's wife is going to be bringing the cooking. And we've got Alani Jackson. She's going to be, showing us how to entertain and set our tables and all of that. So it's going to be a lot of fun. And we're looking to do our next music concert as well. So listen, join us for that and join us again next month as we continue this conversation. All right.
All right. Good night, everyone.